Good to go. All right, there you go, Manal.
All right. So we can continue the discussion. So what's happened so far is like Mike and I started putting together a KEP and started thinking about all the outstanding items. So we can go over the outstanding items, and I think then we need to make a call whether we want to move to beta or GA. So just a sec, I'll try to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it looks great, Manal.
Okay, all right. So here are the items from last week, and then we had a couple more. One, maybe we can just copy it down and for today's meeting.
I already started it on the top, so typically meeting, like new meeting goes on top. But yeah.
Sorry, Sergey. Can you see these items, or did you want to discuss something else?
No, I'm just saying that I put a new date for today meeting on the top. So.
Oh, okay, all right,
yeah.
okay, perfect.
Instead
Okay,
of,
I put it
yeah.
there. Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you.
And then there was Windows privilege containers. So for C groups V2, I took a quick look, and it looks like we should be able to easily add like a Linux resources V2 without like changing our current plans. But the blocker to adding that right now is that we don't have enough information to know whether which fields we want to expose. Like, do we want to expose all the memory fields or so on? And like we have assigned some time in Red Hat to look into that over the next couple of months. So are we okay? I mean, that we spike on that, and then we come back to SIG Node and say, this is our recommendation. These are the fields that should be added. And I don't see a reason to block on it. Thoughts?
Yeah, I was hoping maybe if there's anyone opinion outside of like Red Hat on two groups topics or tracking things on this, happy to hear them. But to me, that generally makes sense. Manal.
Okay, all right. Then the image pull in sandbox. So we have the field already. So only thing that remains is the implementation on the runtime side to do the pulls inside the sandbox C group. And again, I don't think we should block on that for graduating. It's more like an implementation detail on the runtime side rather than a change to the CRI itself.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. We're still trying. I think this is a kind of an ask being driven for Microsoft for the Windows containers, and we haven't had a chance to really follow up with this. We've been looking at the privileged container work instead, so that's perfectly reasonable.
Okay. So user namespace is still, the KEP is still underway. We will again come back to SIG Node next week, and we are looking at potentially adding new fields to the pod, security sandbox, or user namespace modes. And again, that is an addition. So again, like not a blocker, especially given all the unknowns there right now. Any objections? Does that sound good, Derek?
Yeah, I think there was nothing in the CAP that was presented thus far that made us think that there was a backward incompatible issue. So I think that's fine. I mean, I guess we're just evaluating these things to say, like,
but
can
there
we
should
see an issue with backwards compatibility, or can we forward compatible grow?
Yeah.
I guess the question for all the additive changes I would have is how do we communicate those new features to corresponding runtimes? So if you have clear understanding that those new features will be picked up and people will know about it, it's fine to add new features after GA.
So you mean like the runtimes? I mean the containerd and the cryo teams at least are involved in SIG Node, so we would expect those teams to implement. And then, like, are you talking about anything beyond release notes or feature flags, Sergey?
No, I just thinking like those two are big ones, but I'm not sure if there are others. So once it's GA, it's a little bit more. I think it should be a little bit more formal, and I just don't know how it works.
So I would say for a couple of these features, like user namespaces or Secret Suite 2, we could take it on a feature by feature basis, but my default feeling would be demonstrating that it is implementable on more than one runtime provider is a fair forward-looking statement, right? And I feel like we've been doing that now with CRI and Alpha to some degree. That I don't know why we would change our position. So
okay, yeah, I think that's fair for big features, yeah. Okay.
And Sergey, for the announcement channels to reaching the hours runtimes, we can use CNCF SIG runtimes communication channels like mailing list, meetings, and so on to emphasize those new features.
Okay, should we mention somehow? It's all new for me. So if it's common knowledge, it's fine. I don't want to intervene.
Okay. Great. So the next two, I would want like the Windows folks on the call to chime in. Like Mike and I chatted, and we didn't feel a need to block on the version and image pulls if there's a workaround to do it right now, and if later we expect it to be an additive change. So any thoughts?
Yeah, if we're okay having additive changes go in to support these scenarios, I don't think that this should block, especially going to beta, but probably not even GA.
Okay.
And the same for the Windows privileged containers. I think there's more work that we're doing on the just Windows container platform side to really nail down the scenario and what we expect the CRI API changes to look like.
And I think the next two are the more contentious ones. So there is a Docker image pull progress indicator. So CAdvisor versus CRI stats performance, like we in Red Hat did one test and that looked bad from a CRI stats perspective, and we need to follow up and figure out whether it's it's an issue in how we have implemented the stats, or it's an issue with how CRA stats works compared to cAdvisor. So does anyone else have any more information or data that could help here? Like anything from Windows side or any containerd users that are using CRI stats in production?
On Windows, I don't think we have enough kind of data, especially in production, for the CRI stats.
Okay.
Oh, regarding this CRI stats, cAdvisor is good if we're talking about like the normal containers, but if we want to get some stats from inside VM-based runtimes, then CRI stats collection is unavoidable. So we need to have that mechanism in place anyway.
Renal, is the data that we gathered in a format that we can share with the community?
So Robert has a report. We can probably scrub it and share it.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is my biggest worry, Derek. So like, do we block on it? Does this make it a beta till we get to the bottom of those issues? This is the biggest one in my opinion.
So today in Kubelet, we still use cAdvisor stats for the cryo runtime. Like I think we've allowed, I don't know if we did it for containerd or not, I have to check, but we allowed using legacy stat behaviors for particular socket names.
Yeah.
I don't think moving CRI to beta would necessarily mean that we need to remove the legacy stats thing, because I view that as more tied to when is cAdvisor being taken out of the kubelet.
Okay.
And so I don't know if it's a blocker, but I think it'd be good if we can get the data in a format that's shareable. So I haven't seen Robert's report, but I'm curious if it was tied to like just a dense node essentially.
Okay. But and like Alex pointed out, right, the VMs will need CRI stats for sure. So
speaking about VMs, I just recall one issue which I wanted to bring. Sorry for coming back, but it's cgroups v2 related. So do we want at some point to support scenario where host OS might be a cgroups 1, but inside VM it might be like cgroups v2 kernel?
I guess we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, well, the reason why I'm asking is because when maybe instead of trying to add this Linux resources version 2, maybe to come up with one common structure which will be able to communicate resources in a way what runtimes can translate it based like where it will be applied, version 1 or version 2 of cgroups. So like hide these specifics from CRI interface.
Yeah, so I guess my expectation would be that the kubelet communicates to the CRI based on the cgroup subsystem it detects on the host. And if there's any mismatch between the kubelet and then the CRI implementer, then the burden should fall on the CRI implementer to translate. Whereas right now we have the kubelet kind of translating in the present state of the V2 work to a V1 form. And the only reason I say that is like, when we talk about things like cAdvisor or the other monitoring tools, like those same monitoring tools are going to be seeing a cgroup V2 host. And so I think it's, at least the discussions we had in the past with Dawn and other individuals from Google around C groups V1 and V2 is that Kubelet would tolerate either either subsystem, but we never discussed anything around mixed mode support, and so that'd be a difficult thing for me to think through how to test. But I guess if anyone from the community wanted to put together like a test platform to push that and had a use case, I'm sure we'd be open to hearing it.
Yeah, my single point was like, should we really put where implementation specifics parts inside the API? Like, why not to design the API to be implementation independent in a sense? So what burden will be on the runtime?
Like we had structured a lot of the CRI runtime to align to the OCI runtime spec itself. Like, and so I'm assuming
so
we would keep that alignment.
Right. So just to update everyone on the call. So like for V2, right, we simplified the spec where we just have a key value map for unified. So we don't have to keep tweaking the spec again and again. So the V2 spec is much simpler than the way we had it in V1. And over the CRI, I think most of the fields translate well, but there are new ideas in V2 that will need new fields. Like there's a memory low, max, and high. And we don't have an equivalent in V1. So if you want to make it agnostic, we'll have to come up with a way to name it and the right way, and then ignore it in one version versus the other.
But no, maybe the same approach should be taken in the CRI, like the same simple key value map where we'll simplify a lot, both code, kubelet and runtimes.
Is that something we want to do just for V2, or we want to? I mean,
well, in long term, yeah, it makes sense for both versions, and V1 and V2 of C groups.
Yeah, I don't see an issue with that. It makes it easier to add support for new C groups, but on the other hand, it requires more testing in place because it's kind of untight, and you want to make sure that you have enough test cases to not break existing support.
Yeah, but on our hand, if we will have a description of like how we're handling, the known keys, and for example, like unknown keys can be easily ignored, or error situation. But anyway, it's just a spec which will define how to treat those objects.
Yeah.
I guess to the root point, I don't see this as blocking the present spec.
No, it's not blocking it. I'm talking about like long-term evolution, like what we are doing next things.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Alex, that's a good point, and maybe like when we come back to adding the new fields, we can have that discussion. Yeah. And I think like to begin with, I don't see a model where we want to support different versions unless there's a strong case presented by the VM community say that no, we want to separate a different version than the one you have on the host. Just to keep things simple, it might be easier to.
It might be not existing use case, but I can easily come up with a scenario what I will be interested to try. So for example, like where customers running like the old example 7 kernels on the host system, so we are limited with all potential things what C groups V1 in this kernel allows. But for example, we have an application where we want to use the memory pressure adjustments on the fly, and this is available only in C groups too. So the easiest way to run this workload inside VM, run it with C groups V2 and apply with PSI where. It's just like example from top of our head, and we don't know how many of those will be in the future.
I would be just kind of, my view on this is kind of blunt. which is like we support what we test. And so it's hard enough for us to get a cgroups v2 test suite going. And we have cgroups v1 testing suites going. For us to take on a mixed mode, that would mean we would need someone in the community to take on ownership of that test. And so that would be the cost to say, is it worth us doing? So if it's a high enough bar to maintain that infrastructure, then let's do it. But if we don't maintain that infrastructure, then we don't even know if it works.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So I guess, like, Alex, if you don't mind, maybe we can move to the other ones. I'm sure we'll get back to this topic on in SIG Node.
Sorry for interrupting about that.
Yeah, no worries. And the last one, like I didn't get a chance to look at the code again, but I've seen issues, and remember seeing in the past that in the Docker shim code path, there is a way where kubelet and Docker are able to communicate if an image pull is still in progress, and Docker is able to request more time. And we don't have an equivalent in CRI. So any thoughts from folks on the call if they see a need to add that now, or that's something we can tackle later on?
I missed the first part of your statement, Manal. So I recall reviewing a CAP with Tim Hawken on like, should we give people like pull progress event updates?
Yeah, so I remember seeing some code in Docker shim. I didn't see it since yesterday. I didn't get the time. But this code where we are saying, okay, don't cancel this request because my pull is still in progress. Docker is able to communicate that back to the queue.
Okay. But not necessarily back to we can't communicate back to the end user. So there was a CAP that was asking for there to be an event or image pull progress so people would know, why is my pod not yet starting? And I think we didn't move forward with that idea, but if it would improve reliability between kubelet and CRI to let us know that the pull is still in progress, we might want to think about that. Actually,
I'm actually wondering
think about
how it will be visible API side, because the image pull, it's one system call, gRPC call, and it returns either with success or with error.
Yeah, the API would have to change to accommodate a back channel to indicate progress in some way.
I guess what's the negative here though, right? If we say to pull the same image again,
so you'll see some timeouts, and eventually it will succeed. Like the user will end up seeing a few timeouts for the pull.
The user being the kubelet looking at node logs, or who is the user here?
So the kubelet will time out on the image pull. I'll have to check the code to see whether it'll issue. It will most likely issue another one, and then the runtime, if it has an indicator that something is in progress, may just try to wait on that existing pull. To be completed. So till then there'll be a few timeouts, but yeah, I don't have all the details on the failure mode side, Derek.
This used to be more concerning when we couldn't do concurrent image pooling, but I'm trying to think if there's a real concern now. Is there any unique issues in Windows ImageFS storage that we don't know about that makes this important?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Like some historical context, in the early days of Kubernetes, you and Docker, if I recall, and if anybody watches this recording later and says Derek's hardly wrong, I'm sorry, but we originally did concurrent image pools, and then there were issues with file system corruption that could occur when you pulled two images at the same time. And so then it got moved to supporting a serialized image pooler in the kubelet. So we only pulled one image at a time. And then the issues in the runtime container storage layers got resolved. And so now we can go back to concurrent image pooling. And the only thing I'm curious about is like, is there any unknown that maybe we don't know about for how images are stored on Windows that makes serial or concurrent or redundant pull requests problematic?
I don't have some of that context right now. I'll have to. I do remember the issues with the serial image polls, and that I believe has been resolved. I'll have to follow up with some other folks about that.
Okay. Because
It's
if there's not an issue,
if there's other unknowns.
Yeah, if there's not an issue on Windows, I don't really know if this is a blocker for anything.
I know that the way that image polls work was kind of completely reworked, and there's a different image store for the HCS v1, which is what Moby's using, and HCS v2, which is what Containerd is using right now. But I'm not aware of any issues that we've seen with the HCS v2 image poll kind of functionality right now. But yeah, I'll reach out and see.
Okay. And on the Linux side, I guess like I can take an action to just test out a few scenarios and see what does the behavior look like with large images and timeouts. But we don't see it as a blocker, right, for beta to add a progress indicator.
So.
Okay.
I mean, I view it probably more as we have to expect failures will happen, and whether it's an image pull timeout or a gRPC timeout, like we would always have to call again anyway. So it's the nature of Kubernetes.
Okay. Right. And there's one more item from Sasha. Sorry, I forgot to add it here. seccomp CRI. So right now, so the seccomp is not fully typed, and this proposal is to make it typed, like have a runtime default, unconfined, and local host as an enum, and then define a string for the local host path if you choose to use that. So is that something we want to tackle for GA? It should be relatively straightforward to add if we want to make the seccomp better typed than the string type.
I don't see a negative on that. I mean, we only have one official seccomp name we support right now in Cube, if I'm not mistaken.
There's a runtime default, and then unconfined, and the third one is a localhost where you have a path to a policy.
Yeah, although I thought when seccomp went to GA, it was like the other two fail validation. We should go check.
Okay.
So I think there's an emission check now that basically says it has to be runtime default. My memory is escaping me.
Okay.
But we are still continuing to support a way with annotation to specify the like specific profile, seccomp profile, right?
Yeah, I'm having one of those moments where my memory might be failing, but I guess I think making seccomp a first-class enum is a good thing, and I just can't recall if what we did on promoting it to GA around the three different options. I thought it really had made restricted to runtime default as the only allowed field.
Okay. I'll check with Sasha. So Sasha drove a lot of that work. So I'll just check with him and follow up on what we cheered in 119. But I think it's if there's no objections, it's easy enough to add and support in the runtimes. And then there's a longer term question of, will we ever go down the path of actually passing the full OCI types, which I'm less certain of. I mean, I see the seccomp more as profiles from Kubernetes rather than worrying about the syscall level behavior.
One thing what we've seen as similar to seccomp, like the pattern, is the block IO kind of settings. So like the workload can say, I want block IO class XYZ, and with XYZ on the host expands to actual settings to the C groups, like specific def SDA, something this amount of IO ops or something like that.
So this would be a new thing that we can explore adding to the CRI, I guess. I mean, Alex, if I remember correctly, we discussed this in the CDI
Yes.
call as well, right?
Yeah. But similar to that, there is also technology about limiting RDT, well, L3 caches and memory bandwidth. So we also fell into the same pattern. So you have limited amount of classes, which represent some settings on a particular to specific node. And when the workload can say, I belong to this particular class.
Okay. I think that it's fair, but probably those would be additions, right? And unless we want to think about a unified ways to handle all these profiles. And then with profiles, I think the challenge is that it is less portable, because if you have some seccomp policy defined in your cluster, it may not be the same on a different cluster. So I think that's a trade-off there for profiles versus like explicit enumeration, at least in the case of seccomp. And any more thoughts on that? All right, we can quickly see if we missed any topics from last week. So I think we've covered all the outstanding topics from last week. So now, question for you, Derek, is like, should we go to beta or GA? I think that's what is blocking us from starting up a PR for this. I feel that beta may be better given the uncertainty around the stats performance, but would like to hear thoughts from folks on the call.
I guess there's we should probably define what beta meant. So when you say,
I guess, yeah, we're just adding, yeah, beta would mean adding that seccomp enum and then promoting the rest of it, just do cleanups. So Mike and I identified some to-dos and some things that aren't valid in the CRI anymore, like some outstanding questions like, should we drop STD in once or TTY, like things that we have clarified that, yeah, we probably need to keep supporting those fields. So clean up to-dos and comments that aren't valid anymore in the CRI, and then change it, add the seccomp changes and call it beta. And then use a beta period to dig into the dig into the performance issues, if any, and find fixes or workarounds. And we can still make small additive changes before we go to GA in 121.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Will it prevent us to proceed on Docker shim removal, or beta is fine? Because I think a big motivation for this conversation is Docker shim, right?
Yeah, so Docker shim removal is basically, I think the hope here would be that we can announce deprecation of Docker shim, or basically announce no feature evolution in it. At the same time, we could announce CRI to beta. Actual removal of Docker shim, I think, I don't know if Dims is on the call, but I think we wanted to still allow through releases. So the first clock we just want to start here is the deprecation clock.
Okay.
And so I think signaling CRI to beta is fine.
Okay.
And given that there are some API changes we want to make and that type of thing, allowing that phase seems good.
Okay. And in the new KEP template, there's a bunch of questions around like upgrade, rollback, and our answers there is like, we just match the version of kubelet with the runtime. Is that fair? I mean, that's a fair answer to those kind of questions, I guess, because I don't anticipate anyone supporting like an in-place upgrade from Docker to a CRI runtime on a cluster. They would have to plan a node by node rollout, or they'll probably end up creating a new cluster with a new runtime.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair.
Okay.
Jordan Liggett was wanting us to clarify that.
Okay.
But
Well, in theory, if it's upgrade is done by kubeADM, it's potentially it can be doable.
yeah, so SIG cluster lifecycle might have a path that they could make it doable, but it would be like whatever steps would be identified would be up to kubeADM or another lifecycling solution to choose to take on. But I think for this KEP, I don't think.
Yeah, it's probably outside the scope here. Like our thing is like, yeah, drain the node, install the new runtime, make kubelet point to it, and then bring the node back in.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you're going to be downgrading the kubelet at the same time that you do this action. I would anticipate. Like, so you're really talking about rollback and kubelet versions.
Okay. Right.
Do we know? Are we going to have a version of that KEP that we can?
Yeah, so Derek, I'll try to open up the issue and an initial KEP PR today, and then I'll just paste a link in SIG Node for folks to start adding comments. So I think we want to get it merged before the 6th, right? So we don't have much time.
Yeah. Okay.
So the main blocker was just the beta versus GA, and I think that we are in agreement here.
Okay. All right, cool.
All right. Anything else? Otherwise, we have a plan.
I would suggest to post this decision on SIG Node Slack channel at least, so people will know.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Renal, and thanks, Sergey, for keeping awesome notes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll end recording and I'll upload the recording right afterwards here. So bye all.
All right. Bye now.
Hi, thanks.
Bye.